While Guillermo del Toro has made a number of incredible films over the years, two of his most iconic are easily the original two Hellboy movies from 2004 and 2008. While these two movies often get overlooked by people when thinking of superhero movie history, it has a fervent fan base that's been demanding a third movie for many, many years now, and for a while it seemed like it would actually happen. So what if it did? What if Hellboy 3 was made? After the release of Hellboy II: The Golden Army in 2008, the writing seemed to be on the wall for Hellboy 3 to get made in the coming years. Hellboy 2 was seen as a huge step up from the first, which people thought was good, but held back by its audience surrogate. Now, Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman, on the other hand, were actually not initially interested in doing another movie, and neither were Universal, because the second movie actually only scored $168 million at the box office, which was a huge step up from Hellboy 1, don't get me wrong, but it paled in comparison to movies like Iron Man and The Dark Knight that were released that same year. I mean, even Hancock made significantly more money than Hellboy 2, and the prospect of a third movie made Universal very nervous. And this was made even worse by the fact that Del Toro kept saddling himself with new projects, like The Hobbit, and he would actually end up working on the Hobbit movies for 2 years, and when his Hobbit plans went up in smoke, he decided to accept a deal from Disney to direct The Haunted Mansion. Then he agreed to make 2 movies with Warner Brothers, including Pacific Rim and Beauty and the Beast, and these projects would only further set back any possibility of Hellboy 3. On top of all that, Ron Perlman was apparently very reluctant to do Hellboy again because he was getting older, the excessive prosthetics were starting to take a toll on him, and he was apparently really sick when he was doing Hellboy 2. However, fan petitions as well as a Make-A-Wish kid apparently swayed his opinion, and he became more and more eager to cap off the trilogy, although apparently he would change his mind on a regular basis, with Del Toro saying that one week he would have dinner with him, and he would be like, I'm not interested, I don't want to do it, and then the next week he'd be like, when's it gonna happen, when's it gonna happen? And Del Toro said that he believed Perlman is Hellboy, and he couldn't imagine doing it with anybody else. And in the end, it would be Perlman who convinced Del Toro to try making a third movie, feeling like they owed it to fans to answer the unresolved questions brought up in the first 2 movies, particularly regarding Hellboy's prophecy. So Del Toro became reinvigorated by this, and was now hoping to make the third movie for sure. Sadly, Universal Studios seemed to go in the opposite direction. They became increasingly disinterested in making a third one, and at one point Del Toro hoped to move the project over to Legendary Pictures instead, having previously worked with them on Pacific Rim, which Del Toro actually said was one of his favorite filming experiences. Now, Del Toro said that as long as Pacific Rim Uprising was successful, then Legendary would agree to greenlight Hellboy 3. However, that never happened either, since Del Toro dropped out of directing Uprising, and now another part of the movie's problem was sadly something you probably saw coming. The budget. You see, both of the previous Hellboy movies carried a hefty price tag for a movie with no guarantee for success, and Hellboy 3 was set to be the most expensive one yet. Del Toro estimated it would need at least $120 million to get made the way he wanted it to. And now, while the first 2 movies were deemed successful due to their impressive home video sales, the third movie would be made with the streaming wars in full force, so there'd be no guarantee of even home video being profitable. The idea for the plot was that it would take place on an apocalyptic Earth, and would explore the idea of Hellboy's moral complexity. Del Toro wanted us to feel bad when he kills monsters, and make us question if we've been rooting for the right guy. And this way would have seen Hellboy struggle to finally live up to the destiny that he never wanted for himself, to become the beast of the apocalypse, but he would have to in order to protect humanity from this hellish world that he feels responsible for creating. And this would be on top of the fact that he and Liz would have twin children now, that he has to try raising in this hellish world that he feels responsible for. And one of his children would be the embodiment of evil, and the other the embodiment of purity. At one point, Del Toro hoped to do Hellboy 3 as a comic book series instead. However, this idea would be shot down by Mike Mignola, the original Hellboy comic author, who was worried that people would get it mixed up with his own Hellboy comic books, which, yeah, it's a fair point. Either way, Perlman and Del Toro would hold out hope for Hellboy 3, as did the fans who were adamant they were ready for more. However, I guess the news didn't reach Lionsgate, who decided, and this was a really, really bad idea, to reboot the franchise in 2019 with David Harbour, and with no involvement at all from Del Toro or Ron Perlman. Either way, that's what Hellboy 3 would have been like. So, what do I think of it? I know, stop me if you've heard this before, because I've said it so many times now, but once again, it's another Guillermo del Toro movie I wish it got made. Like, okay, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the hugest Hellboy fan in the world. Like, I definitely don't think the Hellboy movies are del Toro's best. Like, I think that Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water are better, but I do think that the Hellboy movies are really, really good. They're so unique compared to other superhero movies, and I agree with most people when they say they were ahead of their time. The world might just not have been ready for the Hellboy movies, but nowadays I think people would have been ready for this trilogy, and maybe more people would have seen it. But as it stands, from the way we have it, I really do think Hellboy 3 could have been something special. But I do understand why it was canceled, I'm sorry to say, because, other superheroes were taking over, and the first two Hellboys didn't make that much money, and Del Toro was asking for a lot of money to do Hellboy 3, and, Perlman wasn't always interested in doing it. So I get why they were reluctant to greenlight it. I understand why they were worried about doing that. And I get why they decided to reboot it. It was a terrible, terrible decision, but I understand why they made it. But it doesn't stop the fact that this movie should have happened. Like, in a perfect world, Hellboy 3 would have happened, and we, instead of having a perfect duology, would have had a perfect trilogy instead. I think Ron Perlman had more to give as Hellboy for sure. I know that he said that he wasn't interested, but, when he became reinvigorated, I think he really meant it. He really wanted to make a really good Hellboy 3 for that Make-A-Wish kid. And I really wish he had, because he seemed really motivated, and I think he would have given his best Hellboy performance in Hellboy 3. Especially because he wouldn't have been like, chained up by the by having to explain everything, by all the exposition. He wouldn't have been held back by all that. He would have been able to just get right into the action, which is what made Hellboy 2 so much better. And now we are on to Hellboy 3, where we don't even have to worry about the real world stuff. We can just focus on the monsters. And that's where Del Toro works at his best, So I think that this movie could have been really good. It would have been really interesting to see Hellboy being a dad. It would have been also interesting to see Abe Sapien having to move on from Nuala's death, and having to live in a world where water is probably not that good, like water is probably scarce. So it would have been really interesting to see Hellboy 3, like a Mad Max style Hellboy movie. That would have been really, really damn awesome. And it's really sad that this movie didn't happen, and we got the 2019 one instead, which sucked. And nobody even saw it anyway. It only made $50 million. So yeah, I mean, it was not a good idea to reboot it. I understand why they did, but it was a terrible idea. And I don't even know if Hellboy 3 getting made would have been better. Like, I don't even know if it would have made more money, but I think it would have, just because, Hellboy had a built-in fan base. And so I at least think Hellboy 3 would have made 100 at least. That's just my opinion anyway. So overall, I do think this sounds like a very ambitious and fun threequel. I think if Del Toro and Perlman were very motivated, then it would have worked. Like, if they didn't want to do it, then it probably wouldn't have been as good. I think it still would have been good, but maybe not as good. But I do think they would have been motivated in the end. They both seemed like they really wanted to make it, and the fan support was there. So I do think this movie would have been more financially successful and critically successful than the 2019 one. So overall, the message of this movie, the 2019 one, was a huge mistake. Either way, guys, let me know what you thought of Hellboy 3. Would you have preferred it to the 2019 one? Are there any fans of the 2019 one out there? I'd love to know in the comments down below. Also, give me more what if recommendations in the comments down below about Guillermo del Toro or anything you can think of. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with all of your friends on all your various social media platforms. And I'll see all of you in the next video.